what is up, Limitless Nation? It is your boy, Coach Andy Riise, here today on MindGym Monday, coming to you live and in living color. Want to give a shout out to the amazing Mari, who's on the ones and twos, always making it happen behind the scenes here too. And I am joined by my fellow room tilter, Double M, Matt Miller. What's up, brother?
What's up, Riise? How you doing? Two eyes. Oh, no, I always say that wrong.
It's all good, man. Just don't call me late for dinner, man. Riise, it all eats. It all eats,
Riise,
man. It's all good.
Riise.
Hey,
just corrected myself.
Better than one. That's all I'm saying. You know?
The two eyes is super cool. So
yeah, absolutely, man. How you doing, brother? Happy belated birthday, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yes. 53 yesterday. So just sat in a bunch of gratitude. And so thank you for that very much.
No, I appreciate that. You did something really interesting that we were talking about in the green room before this. You know, tell us, if you don't mind sharing, tell us what the exercise that you did here to celebrate your birthday. Yeah.
Some people are going to be like, wait a second, this is how you woke up and spent your birthday. But so I woke up, made a cup of coffee, and wrote my obituary. And so I highly encourage people to do that as an activity, because I really celebrated all these stages of life that I've had. And then it became clear on some things I still wanted to accomplish. And so as weird as that sounds, starting your birthday morning with an obituary, thank you, Mari. There's something about getting clarity, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today, which is, you know, how to get to that neutral and what are our next right steps.
Yeah. You know, I actually appreciate you going through that too. You know, I'm an amateur stoic. I guess everybody tries to want to be stoic these days, right? You know, and so big fans of mediocrities, you know, or Epictetus. And so the Stoics, which actually they're the OGs of mental toughness, right? They had this concept called memento mori, right? And this idea is that remember that, hey, death, we are all going to die, right? You know, and so having that perspective kind of puts into the idea that, hey, we got to play present, you know, we got to enjoy the moment, you know. And so I think what you were doing, you know, kind of highlights maybe some of the things that not only where have you been and where you are now, but what do you want to do, knowing that, hey, everything can end in one moment, right? So, you know, going into our intentions for today, I want to, you know, we're talking about this idea of forgiveness and self-forgiveness today, right? And I'm sure if you're reflecting on your obituary like Matt and you're celebrating your birthday and you're looking back, there's all moments that we had as humans where we've really screwed up. We messed some things up. Like we've done a lot of wrongs that maybe things we wanted to say said or done that we want to take back. You know, before, if you can reference this on the Limitless Minds app, the Club Limitless app, you can basically see the live stream where Matt and I had previously talked about this idea about regrets and the power of regrets, right? With Daniel Pink's novel too. But today we're talking about this idea of forgiveness, right? So I want to know if you've joined us today. And first of all, thank you if you have joined us today. But what I'd love to hear in the chat is, what are your intentions when it comes to, what do you want to walk away with some strategies, tools, and techniques to help you get better at the art and science of self-forgiveness? So go ahead and throw those up there while we're doing that. But let's break it down here, Matt. You know, so what's your working definition of what forgiveness is, and specifically self-forgiveness?
I love always, anytime we have a theme, I always love just Googling like the straight definition of that, right? And so if you Google forgiveness, the first thing that comes up, it says the intentional decision to let go of resentment and or anger. The intentional decision to let go of. And I love where you started, which is, I think too many times we look everywhere else and we need to start with ourselves. How about you?
Yeah. You know, I want to riff off that too, because I did a little bit of digging into this too. And we're going to highlight a story here that kind of inspired this topic in my mind, you know, but just to kind of, I think that definition is really sound, but let's talk about what it is and what it isn't. Right. So first of all, self-forgiveness is a switch. It's this ongoing process that happens over time. And we get at it through doing the mental and emotional work, through reflect, exactly what Matt did. And that allows us to then be able to regulate in the moment and then manage our thoughts and our behaviors using that A and B button we talked about before. It's like this balance that we strike between taking responsibility and maintain a positive image of ourselves, right? And so when you can find this balance, this integration, you can get self-forgiveness. And this comes from Woodyat and research done in 2017. And I'm referencing psychology. So a great resource for you is in addition to our app and a lot of the resources we provide. that I'm giving you, some references to here. And then we're going to talk about the 8 steps to self-forgiveness later on. Comes from positivepsychology.com. So shout out to them as well. But I think what is important for us to understand is like the basics, the blocking and tackling that goes into that. And that's, first of all, it's the release of negative emotions that we direct towards ourselves when we beat ourselves up as our own worst critic. It means the cultivation of neutral and positive emotions towards ourselves, and then the acceptance of our responsibility, towards those next best steps, right? Before I kind of get into the story too, like when you think about, some of the myths and misconceptions about, forgiveness. So what jumps out in your mind in your own personal experience, either with yourself or through your coaching?
I think what you're hitting on, I love what you highlighted was it's just not a one-time deal. Like every day, kind of the 3 circles that you just kind of mentioned, I think as coaches and room tilters, we're in and out of every day, which is what has happened, what's in my circle of control, and what's my next right step. And whatever has happened, right? We talk about how to get to neutral. It's irrevocable. There's nothing we can do. What's in my circle of control? Sometimes that's forgiving myself for whatever I didn't do right. And so now it's like, okay, the only way I know in my experience is to focus on what's my next right step. And I think what we do well as coaches and room tilters is we acknowledge what happened. We get in our circle of what we have control over, forgiveness being one of those, and then really focusing on the next step that helps us, I think anyway, in that unpacking that forgiveness.
Yeah. And I think the so what, or the big reason why forgiveness is so important is that it helps us move from counterproductive thinking and how we see ourselves, the perception about ourselves, and shift to more productive thinking patterns, right? That helps us actually become the person that we want to be, and then also it helps us to be able to then forgive others, which can sometimes be really, really difficult, and I just want to highlight there's a difference between like forgiving and forgetting. How do you differentiate those 2 concepts, Matt?
Well, I might not have the analogy I use when I'm helping people with this is forgiveness is like that backpack that you're carrying around and it's just weighting you down. And I think where we get forgiveness confused is there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. And
great point.
Reconciliation is the 2 of us working it out. Forgiveness is that's my own work. And what I realized in my own unpacking of forgiveness is whatever the relationship was, I just had to do my work. The only thing I have control over that's in my circle is my forgiveness. And once I did that work and let go of that backpack and wasn't carrying that weight, it was amazing what happened. So those of you tuning in that have gone through this work of forgiveness, it's exhilarating in the sense of you don't realize the weight that you're carrying in that backpack. And I know, Andy, one of the things you talked about that kind of spurred our topic today is seeing a story about that and kind of some of your self-reflection. Can you kind of highlight that?
Yeah, I think that's a great segue, brother, too. And before I get into the story here that inspired this, for context here, I just want to point out what Krista wrote here. Do you mind reading that real quick, Matt?
Yeah, forgiving myself is surrender from the past so I can embrace the unknown future. Allows me to believe that there's a better version of me coming.
Yeah, it's a great comment, Krista. As I think that, belief is all about, beliefs are really powerful, right? And beliefs allow us to be able to, it's the lens in which we see ourselves and we see others, right? And when we see forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, allows us to move from our current self to our future self. And that really starts with how we see ourselves, right? So it allows us to be able to make those next steps and creates a framework for us to be able to do the work that we're talking about. But just to kind of hit on the inspiration here. So we've talked about the what and the so what, now let's kind of get into the context here a little bit too. And I want to do that with a story that I think is really powerful, right? So, obviously, room tilters, a lot of us, come from the world of sport. And so Matt and I are huge sports fans. We could watch 2 cockroaches racing and probably have a good time, over some cold beverages and some snacks, right? But this is so of course we're fans of ESPN and Sports Center, and specifically, I don't know, those guys always get me with the 30 for 30s and their Sports Center features, all those human stories that they tell. They do such a good job of telling those stories, man, and I'm always got to put a tissue there, next to him too. And this is a great example. I'm sitting there watching Sports Center, and they had this featured story, and this is what really inspired us to talk about this topic today. So about 13 years ago, we had a young pitcher. He's 18 years old. His name's Andrew Bellotti. And we're going to show the video here in a minute. But he was a prospect for the Tampa Bay Rays organization as a pitcher. He just came home for his rookie ball year, and he was driving along a local highway. We've all been there. You're behind a slow car. You're in an area you're familiar with. And you're like, I'm just going to pass this person and kind of blindly do that. Well, he did that, got into the oncoming traffic, and immediately crashed head on to another motorist, too. And there were two people in the car. Okay. And then the Reed family was in the car, David Reed and his son, Everett, if I remember that correctly too, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But it ended up instantly killing David, who was a career Navy veteran. He was coming back from a practice with his son, seriously injured the son. David, the driver, baseball pitcher, was not injured, just had some minor injuries, was released. Well, of course, he goes to the trial. And in the trial process, Lynn Reed, the wife, wanted to show leniency, right? She actually pleaded for leniency in terms of the sentencing, and that ended up resulting in him getting charged with second-degree manslaughter. He ended up spending a few months in prison. He was released and was able to start his life all over again, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it, that in and of itself. But then they lost touch with each other. But while Andrew was in prison, he wrote this letter, handwritten letter to the Reed family called Dear Mrs. Reed, which is the prelude to what this Sports Center featured topic is all about too. And then what ended up happening is that he ended up having a pretty good career, ups and downs. But last year, the Reeds, Andrew got on their radar again too, because he ended up getting a save and winning the Game 3 of the World Series last year with the Phillies against the Astros, my hometown Astros here today, which I remember watching that game. Had no idea about this story. So what you're going to see, but they never stayed in touch, right? They never got a chance to do it. And actually, the Reed family never even read the letter. And Mrs. Reed found the letter, broke it back open, and then the Reeds and the Bellotti family got together. And what you're going to see is a clip here of Andrew in the Reed family's living room 13 years later, having the opportunity to be able to say his sorry. And I want you to pay attention to what goes into this. And I want you to pay attention to what you hear and what the behaviors are that are going on too. And then we're going to break that down and put this one in the context of how do you actually forgive yourself, which is probably the hardest part of this too. So Mari, if you don't mind, let's go show this clip in the Reed family room here. All right, we maybe have some. Okay, just need one second.
Get it loaded back up.
So I'm gonna set the scene here a little bit too while we're bringing this up too. All right, so can you imagine for a second, right? You've been living with this tragedy for 13 years of life. You're a young man. You're 18 years old. You're just starting your life, and it's almost over before you even started, right? If you think about this for a second here, like if we were to put ourselves in our shoes, what would be going through your mind, Matt?
The thing that caught me that you said the most was the act of what he did, which is writing it down. And so maybe that's coming fresh off of me doing a lot of reflection yesterday and actually writing. And I think there's one thing, as you know, from different mediums, there's one thing to think it and like there's another just to be writing it down. So I think as we unpack different ways to forgive ourselves, this power of writing and getting it down on paper, I think is a great next step for anybody that's working towards what this looks like. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, just first of all, just having the courage to be able to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? To be able to like, okay, we've been out of touch. A lot of time has happened. There's been a lot of water under the bridge. I don't know if these people hate me or not, right? The courage on both sides just to be able to get together, so it was really remarkable too. So, well, we're waiting for Mari to be able to load that tune. If she gets a chance to get here, we're working through some technical difficulties here in the background too. But there's a couple things that jump out that I want to highlight it before we can get into the how-to or the now what. Number one is that, hey, he actually, you could generally see how apologetic he was. And what's interesting is he thanks them for the opportunity for him to be able to continue his life because, he could have spent a life in prison, but now he's married and has a kid, and has had the opportunity to be able to live his big league dreams because of that, right? And Mrs. Reed, in response to that in the couch, she's like, she's obviously emotional, right? Which I wanted you all to see that. But if you don't have that, we're going to throw up the link here. You can just Google search "Dear Mrs. Reed" if you don't have it. We can't show it here too. But she says, "I'm so proud of you." Right? I mean, think about that for a second. It's almost like he's like her own son. "I'm so proud of you." Do you know who would be the most proud of you? It would be David, the man that he killed. Would be the most proud of you, right? And then she goes on and later to say that, and you could see that this reconciliation happening that you're saying, but she says that the hardest part, and I don't think she says "I forgive you," but they didn't have to say that, and we know that because 55% of what we say is through body language. So the forgiveness is there, right? And it's gone beyond that to a compassion about where each other are, and what do we need to do to be able to move forward, right? And even the son who had a lot of resentment, and at some point in the future, he said, "Hey, if I got in a room with this guy, I would want to tear him apart." That's how angry he was at some point in time too. And here he is saying, "Now I got a chance to meet you." It's humanized this situation, right? And so, and now they also said, the hardest part about this process is you forgiving yourself, right? That is the hardest part. And I think this took a huge step to be able to move forward together, to be able to take the next best step too. And so if you get a chance, check it out too, but from your perspective, what do you think about this story, right? In terms of you forgiving yourself for maybe some things you've done in the recent or long past, what is the next best step towards a small victory when it comes to forgiving yourself? I want to see what you have to say in the chat, so let's get into let's get into the how-to. Let's actually get in the gym and start getting some reps and sets. So before I get into some of the buy the book stuff, what's your take on that, Matt? Like, if you were to talk about 1 to 3 things you'd recommend our audience do to be able to forgive themselves, what would that be?
I keep coming back to what you said, the difference between forgiving and forgetting. And as we do that reflection of what we want to forgive, there is a level of me forgetting whatever that was, in the sense of no disrespect to, and especially the situation that you're bringing in. But I think where I've been most effective in my forgiving is that I'll learn from it, and I'm taking that learning, but I am kind of forgetting everything else. Because if I don't do that mental work of forgetting that, and I keep thinking about it, now I'm back in the gym doing the same thing that I just did, and I've already done that rep. And so I think there is this level of forgetting that helps me, and I'm just speaking to my forgiveness, that's like, you know what, I'm going to do the work, but then that's done. I'm not thinking about it anymore. It's got me to this spot, which now I can take a next right step, and I'm not like, there's a lot of activities people have done around this, right? I said a backpack where you're letting go. Anybody that watched The Last Dance, they ended with writing it on a piece of paper, and Phil Jackson, they all burn them up, right? Like, I'm done. That's enough. Or the activity of carrying the rock to the top of the hill and throwing it off. Like, just something in that physical thing to be like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm throwing it off the cliff. I'm burning it. I'm letting go of the backpack. Like, any analogy that works for you to be like, that's my definition of forgetting. Like, I'm letting go.
Yeah. Because I think what you're saying kind of on a neurological level is like, we got to be able to then identify those counterproductive brain patterns that are happening, right? And then be able to reverse that cycle with more productive ones, and again, that starts with how we think and what we do, just to kind of reference here too, there are 4 R's when it comes to that are easy to remember here. For the 4 R's of self-forgiveness. One is responsibility, right? So you got to be able to seek forgiveness by taking responsibility and not giving blame, right? It doesn't matter whose fault it is. And even if it is completely someone's fault, what is your 1% that you own in that process, right? The number 2 R is remorse. Again, this comes from Cornish and Wade, and they suggest that, you work through difficult emotions like shame to more offense-specific emotions like guilt, which are more likely to motivate people to make reparations, right? So that's actually, the remorse piece is important to understand. The next thing is restoration. In order to make things right and repair relationships, and reaffirming more values that were broken, we've got to be able to work to restore and rebuild, right? And the last piece is renewal. And this is where self-forgiveness, self-compassion, and self-respect come into play. And through that process, you can achieve what's called moral growth, right? And morals are versus what's right or wrong, and so we talk about this moral compass, but there's also this idea of moral injury and moral growth can happen as well too. And post-traumatic moral growth is actually a thing, so what out of those 4 R's, what do what jumps out to you? And we'll start getting into the 8 steps and the how-to model here, Matt.
So I wrote those down. So thank you for that. And I think it's hard not to start with the first one, which is responsibility. And I think of when it comes to forgiveness and a relationship, if it deals with someone else, I think we can get caught in obviously waiting for them to say sorry, waiting for them to whatever. And that's outside our circle of control. And so at some point, you just have to take responsibility to say, you know what, I'm going to forgive that person and I'm just going to move on. And I'm not going to wait for that, whatever I'm waiting on. Right. So it's kind of just taking the responsibility and being like, okay, what's in my circle of control, moving on and just taking responsibility for this and saying forgiveness. How about you?
Yeah, no, I think for me, it's, the genuine feeling of remorse and moving from remorse to restoration, right? And so it's like, I think it's important to be able to experience emotions, but when you get stuck in that cycle, then that can be difficulty. So then how do I move forward to be able to salvage what I have and learn from it, filter out the things that I don't need, hold on to the things that I do need, and then didn't be able to take those next steps, right? I think that's it's super important. So Mar, if you don't mind here too, we're just going to break it down one at a time. So the next few minutes here too, and we love to hear your comments as well too. So if you get any comments or questions, throw them up on the chat, and we'll be monitoring that. And Matt, if you don't mind flagging that for us too. But let's now get into the action steps that you can actually go practice, right? So let's start with number one. Number one is identify. This is when you identify the events or behaviors you wish to forgive yourself for, right? So maybe using the context of Andrew Bellotti or maybe your own personal experience, what would an example of that look like, Matt?
To forgive yourself. Again, with me, I think it's a relationship that I continue to try to mend, that finally I'm just like, I just need to forgive that person, and there's not going to be reconciliation there. And so I'm moving forward with identifying. And I think as people tune in, that is where we're encouraging people to start, is what is one area that you can identify that you need to practice when it comes to self-forgiveness, right?
Yeah, right. So, but I think like to your point, right, the first thing we got to be able to do is identify what is at the heart of the issue here too. And then that leads to the second thing, which is explore, and again, through Andrew's case right here too, he did it by writing it down here. But obviously he then, was able to mentally prepare before he went and talked to the family. That's to explore your responsibility in terms of what you own for what happened in the situation, right? And to what extent were you responsible, right? And again, you may want to not only qualify that, but maybe you want to quantify that in your mind, right? But we're not about blame. We're talking about responsibility, which are different things. So what's your take on this second step of exploration, Matt?
It's pointing the fingers back at me. Again, I think where I hear and coach people around this, we get stuck with, well, they, and it's like, whoa, start your sentence with I, right? I, this. And so like you said, identify, but then explore. It's kind of like what you just said earlier. Like, even if it's just, you feel you're only 1% of this, right? Just identifying and owning that one part, I think is critical in that step.
Yeah. Because I think what we're doing is like, we're building awareness, right? And I think that's, identifying and then becoming, and then understanding, hey, what is it? And what's my part are two important steps, because that leads to what we know from Stephen Hayes and ACT, which is kind of the science behind neutral thinking, is that's the third step, which is to accept and experience the feelings of remorse, right? So when you've acknowledged your level of responsibility, you've identified the heart of the issue, you try to accept this, right, by looking at it objectively, which we talk about, right? Remorseful or shameful feelings that arise may be difficult to sit with, right? But it's important that, shout out to Krista, kind of using the Pono model here too, like pausing and creating space and to be able to sit with this, although it's uncomfortable, allows us to then be able to then process it, right? What's your take on the acceptance phase of number 3 there, Matt?
Well, I think that's where, back in the day, Trevor reminded us that that's where the positivity movement went a little wrong, right? Is that it didn't acknowledge that bad things or negative things have happened. And so I think this acceptance of that is another example where we're like, you know what? Okay, this did happen. That person did do that. I did that, right? And so just accepting that piece and taking ownership, which I love these first 3 steps is, okay, identify it. What is that area? Explore, but then just accepting responsibility, I think, is key in all of that.
Yeah.
How about you?
Because, well, I think to the point here is that when you're able to do that, then you're able to then, be able to look at things and separate. It's creating that separation, that detachment from it, that then allows you, because we are not our thoughts, right? That's an important thing for us to remember. I'm going to say that we are not our thoughts or emotions, right? So we can actually detach ourselves from that. I call it the bus exercise, where we're the driver of the bus and our thoughts and our emotions are the passengers. We can notice our thoughts and feelings and actually, look at them a little bit more objectively, knowing that we're not fully objective beings, right? There's a level of subjectivity to everything, right? So we want to be mindful of our thoughts and feelings. We want to challenge our perfectionism, right? And that's ego driven and unreasonable or unrealistic standards that we have that we hold ourselves to, right? And we all do that because we're our worst critic. So if you're feeling guilt or shame, try to understand in this context that it's a one unique event or behavior. It's a one-time, one thing. It's not all the time, everything, which is a key to resilience. And you want to avoid generalizing the feelings that you as a person, are, or characteristics, this mistake that you made or this failure that you had is, personal and pervasive, right? You want to make it temporary and not personal, behavior based, right? So focus on your actions and not your character. Don't assassinate your own character. What do you think about that as far as noticing your thoughts and your feelings more objectively, Matt?
I don't think we can say it enough that, our thoughts, are not who we are. And so just acknowledging those and noticing your thoughts and feelings. I think that's what we try to practice the most at Room Tilters, right? Is just noticing is the first step in all of that. And so if we're getting too far into the future, anxiety, too far in the past, how do we be just present in the moment? And so I think 4 is our wheelhouse when it comes to us as, room tilters and helping people, which is acknowledging this thing you're thinking about and continue to think about, like, what's our next step that we're doing with that. And so with a minute on the calendar, Andy, fly us through the next 4.
Yeah. So, I know you're coming up on the top of the hour, so thanks for that. Number 5 is to make amends, which you're going to notice that Andrew does that. So when possible, it's not always possible for you to be able to have that, to be able to try to make it right. And sometimes your expectation of what it looks like is not going to be what you thought it was. So when it's appropriate, make amends with the person that you harmed or you wronged. Number 6 is recommit, that you learn from the experience. Again, this is selective perception and mentally filtering out what's not helpful and then holding on to the things that you can actually learn and grow from. Number 7 is nurture compassion, right? And that's trying to build up those good feelings about yourselves, those productive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and show yourself grace. And then finally, 8 is let it go, right? Which is of the season here, right? Because this is the fall. This is when it's time for change and transition. Just like the leaves are let go of the leaves that are not, that to be able to grow new leaves and to begin again, which is the Latin phrase for nunc cepi. How do you begin again? And you can begin again sometimes by letting go, So any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
When you say amends, I think, again, we can get caught between the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. And today, I think what we try to encourage people more than anything is hearing this word forgiveness. Where can I start identifying, step number 1, some work that we need to get done. And then ultimately, what's one thing that I can let go? So, Andy, with that said, what's our next right step for viewers?
So again, check out our resources. Make sure you check out the Andrew Belletti story on SportsCenter. Check out positivepsychology.com and be sure to download and check out our app for more great information and content, or see the recording here. Be sure to tune in the same bat channel, same bat place tomorrow. Of course, it's a series every day to be able to show up and show out. So today you learned about getting in the gym and getting those reps and sets on how to be able to demonstrate self-compassion. We talked about the what, the so what, and now what. Thank you so much again for everybody. Matt, thank you for showing up. Mari, thank you for everything. Thank you for everyone who has shown up here live with your chats and comments. Shoot us questions of topics and questions that you have, because we want to address those, as the best we can too. Have a great day, Limitless Nation, and we'll see you in the arena.